SpongeBob is an iconic character with a rich back catalogue of video games. There are some truly great SpongeBob games out there, but on the other hand, there are also some truly questionable ones as well. Now, I've played a lot of SpongeBob's home console offerings, but I've never really taken the time to see how he gets on in the handheld department. So today I thought I'd start off with SpongeBob's efforts on the PSP. Now, the PSP was only graced with 2 different SpongeBob games in its life cycle, so we will just take a look at these 2 games in their release order. So without further ado, this is SpongeBob SquarePants: The Yellow Avenger. And no, this is not an Avengers and SpongeBob crossover. Anyway, The Yellow Avenger was developed by Tantalus Media and published by THQ. It released on the Nintendo DS in November of 2005 and would find itself onto the PSP in March the following year. Tantalus Media were known for their licensed tie-in games, especially in the handheld market. They developed Top Gear Rally for the Game Boy Advance, which was a weirdly impressive 3D racer for the system, which was obviously quite a rarity, and would later go on to develop Cars Mater National Championship for the Game Boy Advance using that same engine. They later went on to do some pretty high-profile ports for Nintendo, including Luigi's Mansion 2 HD for the Switch and Zelda Skyward Sword HD, also for the Switch. Anyway, so let's talk about the Yellow Avenger. So the plot of this game starts with SpongeBob on his way to see Patrick, and as he's doing this, he gets knocked into by the Dirty Bubble rushing along with a captured Barnacle Boy. SpongeBob then calls for the help of Mermaid Man and eventually leads them into an altercation where SpongeBob accidentally puts the Dirty Bubble into a washing machine with Mermaid Man's belt, and then this causes to split the Dirty Bubble into countless many little Dirty Bubbles. So all these little Dirty Bubbles are harassing the citizens of Bikini Bottom, and on top of this, many of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy's iconic villains have returned to exact revenge on Bikini Bottom, including Man Ray, the Sinister Slug, Jumbo Shrimp, and the Atomic Flounder. So yeah, anyway, SpongeBob ends up with Mermaid Man's belt and gets his powers to help save Bikini Bottom. So what follows is, well, I mean, it's a game. It's a game that works. The Yellow Avenger is a platforming adventure that also has a lot of backtracking. Bikini Bottom has been translated into this 2.5D platforming world, and honestly, it's been done quite well. You have all your iconic locations, such as SpongeBob's house, the Krusty Krab, the boating school, Jellyfish Field, so on and so forth, and honestly, it looks quite nice. It's very colourful, as is the show, and has been translated pretty well here. So let's talk about the core gameplay. So the gameplay loop of SpongeBob the Yellow Avenger revolves around you platforming and basically just doing fetch quests. Whilst the overall plot of the game sees many supervillains attacking Bikini Bottom and what feels to be a very epic story, for the most part you're just going to be walking about doing irritating chores for people, taking a burger from the Krusty Krab, delivering it to Patrick, finding Squidward's flute and then delivering that back to him, so on and so forth. There's just a lot of filler in between the actual boss fights and stuff that you're doing as a superhero. The world is split up into 9 segments, and each section as a level by itself would be pretty damn good, to be honest with you. There's some pretty decent platforming challenges here, as well as some cool little superpower interactive sections. However, the problem is, the citizens of Bikini Bottom are running around scared with bubbles attacking them, and when you hop on top of them, the bubbles float away, you catch the bubble and the citizen just disappears. But as soon as you leave an area and come back into it, all these troubled citizens with bubbles come right back as well. So if a character gives you a fetch quest to go to the next area, get something for them and come back, by that point all the enemies, or well, citizens you've cleared through will have just respawned upon your return to the area to get the item back. It's a bit of a weird choice. I mean, it makes sense because otherwise there'd be no challenge, but at the same time it's incredibly annoying. On top of this, these citizens are all just a predetermined preset amount of the same citizen, so you have one that runs back and forth and then jumps at either edge. You have a weirdly looking muscly one that runs really fast and just flips around. Then there's a few that just walk back and forth that are interchanged depending on what area you're in. but overall they're just a problem. When you first get into the game and you've saved a bunch of these citizens in the first area by jumping on them, absorbing the bubble and moving on, it feels quite rewarding because you've just saved a bunch of Bikini Bottom citizens' lives as a superhero. And then you come back and it's the same thing over and over, so that sense of pride or satisfaction you get from hopping on their heads and stopping the bubbles just goes away almost immediately. In fact, the only reason you really need to keep doing this is because the bubbles help charge your superpowers, and that's quite literally the only reason to do so. It just becomes a grind rather than something a superhero should be doing and saving lives. So let's talk about the actual platforming. Movement in this game is interesting. Sometimes it feels really fluid, sometimes it feels really clunky, and there is quite literally no in between. The jump you will perform will either be the most perfectly perfected jump of all time, or you will have misjudged so badly the game will wonder what the hell you're actually doing. Whilst moving about, sometimes you have to move up or down into the background of the level as well, and it's not done very well, to be honest with you. It doesn't feel fluid. Sometimes you just stop as SpongeBob tries to figure out what he's doing. Occasionally the camera angles of where you follow the level are so zoomed in on SpongeBob there's no way to see an enemy coming right towards you or an obstacle that's in your way. It's not done very fairly and it felt very cheap when I lost health to them. Anyway, let me stop moaning for just a moment. This is not the worst game I have ever played by a long shot. It has some fun moments with some pretty decent platforming challenges, as well as, to be honest, a pretty good story considering this is a SpongeBob game. Although I'm yet to play it, I've heard the DS version is definitely superior to this, but to be honest, as far as licensed tie-in games go, you could certainly do a lot worse than this one. So continuing on top of the 2D platforming sections that pretty much take up most of the game, there are also some sections where you are now able to move around a 3D environment, and these are pretty much exclusively limited to people's houses and certain rooms, such as SpongeBob's house, Squidward's house, the retirement home for Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, so on and so forth. And typically you will just go in these places to help with the fetch quests or do little interactive sections such as feeding Gary or setting SpongeBob's alarm for work. It's in these sections that you begin to realise some of the character models in this game are, interesting. The actual game itself looks really nice, but my god, some of these SpongeBob characters did not make a very good jump to 3D here on the PSP, I have to say. I'm looking at you especially, Squidward. Oh my god. Overall, the world of SpongeBob on the PSP is right at home. It looks nice graphically, it's got a nice aesthetic to it, but what actually happens inside the game is just boring, to be honest with you. It's faffy, it's quite long, and it's only long because there's so much backtracking. The boss fights, when they occasionally happen, are okay, but are, well, quite easy and quite repetitive. And to be honest with you, the soundtrack, whilst charming at first, can get grating very quickly, because when you're in an area, it's pretty much just the same 1 to 2 minute song on a loop for however long you're in that space for, and that can get quite annoying. Anyway, so in terms of critical response, SpongeBob SquarePants The Yellow Avenger holds a 48 out of 100 metascore, putting it in the generally unfavourable bracket. And sadly, the same can be said for Metacritic's user score, which is sat at a 4.9 out of 10, putting it in that exact same bracket. As I briefly mentioned, the DS version in terms of review scores is certainly a lot higher with a 67 out of 100, but that still isn't that good. Now, as per VG charts, the PSP port of this game actually didn't sell too badly, selling just shy of 1 million units. Now, before we go any further on with the video, if you are a fan of licensed tie-in games, SpongeBob, any of that, then this channel will be perfect for you, so why not hit that subscribe button and tap the bell for notifications of my future uploads. Okay, so for our second and final SpongeBob game for the PSP, we have SpongeBob's Truth or Square. This particular port was developed by Barking Lizard Technologies. and was released in October of 2009 in America and September of 2010 in Europe. This is a game that is based on the anniversary episode with the same title, and this was for the 10th anniversary of SpongeBob. The home console version of this game was actually developed by Heavy Iron Studios, who were responsible for the original Battle for Bikini Bottom and the SpongeBob SquarePants movie game, as well as several Disney tie-ins including the Incredibles game, Ratatouille, WALL-E and Up, and these are the home console versions. So the plot of this game goes as follows. Whilst hosting a party at his home, SpongeBob has been entrusted with the Krabby Patty formula. But because the old sponge is so excited, he then immediately forgets where he's put it. Plankton decides to help SpongeBob to remember where he put it, although obviously he just wants the formula, so he tries to put some little robots in SpongeBob's mind to go through his memories, and then the robots break, so Plankton has to go in himself. And then you go through SpongeBob's happiest memories because he says himself he can't remember anything unless he's happy. Now, the Truth or Square episode had a similar theming where SpongeBob was trying to escape somewhere and they were going through their memories to pass the time, but obviously this premise had to be changed a little bit to work better in a video game. And I have to say, as a setup, the plot works really well for a game, it's just the story in execution isn't done very well. Anyway, let's discuss the gameplay. So whilst the Yellow Avenger was a primarily 2.5D side-scrolling platformer, with a few small 3D enclosed environments, this is a 3D platformer action-adventure kind of thing, with a little bit too much emphasis on the action for my personal taste, but it's still pretty fun. Now, while SpongeBob either felt really good or really clunky in the Yellow Avenger, here he is a delight to control. Moving SpongeBob around and doing all the platforming is very satisfying. It flows exactly as you would expect it to, considering this is a port of a game that was originally made by the developers of Battle for Bikini Bottom and the movie game. The platforming in those games was very satisfying and worked, so I'm very glad to see that's translated well here on the PSP. Now, whilst the platforming and very mild puzzle solving are fun, there are a lot of annoying combat sections. Now, combat in the Yellow Avenger was just really irritating, to be honest with you, just because it was very unpredictable with the screen zoom in, but this, it's just repetitive. It's not broken, it just gets quite boring quite quickly. SpongeBob has a couple of different weapons he can, well, literally transform to in his arsenal, and that includes a cannon, a spatula, a ship wheel, and he can get really buff and ripped to help do damage to enemies and unlock certain sections of levels. Now, that does sound varied, but the problem is all of these things come down to just pressing one button. And that's it. There are small sections where you can unlock additional happy objects for within SpongeBob's home to help him remember, and these are gained by doing these challenges that typically revolve around you either having to destroy a certain amount of robots or survive for 30 seconds against a certain amount of robots. It's all very repetitive, and you're in a very enclosed space, and it's very easy to get hit because you can't see what's going on as well. Personally, I would have preferred to have seen some more difficult platforming challenges to earn these objects rather than the same 2 or 3 combat challenges rinsed and repeated throughout every level, but that's just me. There are also these very weird sections in the levels where you have to cross what I'm assuming is jelly. It's this pink substance, and SpongeBob can only pass across it when he's just licking it, and you just slide along on his tongue, and you can't do anything else during this time. It's never really explained what it is that's actually happening, and it's a little bit odd, and it looks very bizarre. There are sections of this that are downhill and round corners that I would have expected would have been these kind of fun and challenging sliding sections where you can't stop, but no, you can just turn around and go back up whenever you want. Now, in terms of graphics, I can't lie to you guys, this is not the best looking game to have ever graced the PSP. There are definitely worse looking ones out there, but there are some graphical imperfections, shall we say, and quite a few reused assets placed throughout the game as well. I mean, even in the little hub section of SpongeBob's house, there's the same fish dancing twice in 2 different parts of the same room. You know damn well there were plenty of back characters of fish from SpongeBob they could have placed in here instead of just copying and pasting the same one. I mean, he's a funky looking dude though. As you progress through the levels, you collect these SpongeBob token things that you can use to upgrade items in SpongeBob's house to make him feel happier, such as the paintings or pictures on the wall, his chair, his bathroom, stuff like that. So you see the hub world evolve as you progress and spend more of your tokens, which is a nice touch. And all of those happy objects you collect from the challenges are on display across the house as well. So it's cool to see a nice method of tracking your progress. I just wish that gaining that progress was perhaps just a little bit more challenging. Now, in the Yellow Avenger, the story was exclusively told through text. There was no voice acting, which was probably one of the bigger letdowns of the game. However, I'm pleased to say here that pretty much the entire SpongeBob voice cast have come back to voice their respective characters, aside from Clancy Brown as Mr. Krabs, who has been replaced here by Bob Jones. I'm not saying it's noticeable, but, well, yeah, it is quite noticeable.
SpongeBob, look sharp, me boy! Tomorrow's a very important day for Kashi. Think of all the Krabby Patties we'll sell.
Now, interestingly enough, the PSP and DS versions of this game were home to two exclusive levels, and that's Bikini Bottom and the Krusty Krab. So that is something worth noting if you did want to play through this game. Now, whilst the soundtrack to the Yellow Avenger was frankly quite repetitive and got quite irritating after a short period of time, the soundtrack to Truth or Square, literally for like levels on end, has the same song just on repeat. And I mean, that's not great. There's a mini-boss early on in the game at the end of a level, and it's just the same relaxed music that plays. There's no change or anything, it doesn't feel like a threat. It's just more relaxed stuff going on. Now, overall, in terms of gameplay, I would definitely say that Truth or Square is the better game. It feels more fluid, I enjoy the 3D platformer setting more, but in terms of the story, and to be honest, the visual presentation, this definitely isn't the superior game. The Xbox 360 version is definitely superior in terms of gameplay and graphics, so if you're going to play a version, I would probably just recommend that one. However, compared to the Yellow Avenger, this game is actually very short. The Yellow Avenger isn't a long game, you can complete that in like 4 or 5 hours if you're dawdling about, but Truth or Square you could literally finish in like 2 hours. And frankly, this game wouldn't have been the cheapest upon launch, so it does beg the question, were you getting good value for your money? The answer's no, obviously. Now, in terms of critical response, I could barely find anything across any version of SpongeBob's Truth or Square. In fact, the only review by a critic on Metacritic is for the 360 version, and that's a 40 out of 100, so not ideal. But if we base it off of the user score, as there are actually a couple of reviews on here, that has a 5.8 out of 10, placing this nicely into the mixed or average realm. Now, as per VG charts, SpongeBob's Truth or Square would go on to sell just over 400,000 copies worldwide, not as many as the Yellow Avenger, and I don't find this particularly surprising because there appears to have been next to no marketing for this game, nearly no professional critic responses or anything. This game seems to have flown completely under the radar in some instances. Anyway, that takes us to the end of our look at the two SpongeBob PSP releases. What are your thoughts on these games? Did you own them? Were you a fan? Let me know in the comments down below. If you'd like to see more SpongeBob content, please leave a like on this video, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe and tap the bell for notifications of my future uploads. Thank you ever so much for watching, and as always, I will see you in my next video. Bye bye.
Where's the leak, ma'am?